Super Snipers! It's truly a phenomenal dueling game all about outmaneuvering your opponent through the power of determination, perseverance, and this neat gun I found. This game has all sorts of different modes, characters, abilities, and like 4 different ways to even set up the game in just the basic mode. This one has a lot going on. As a result, it can be difficult to know where to even start when teaching a friend how to play it. So, why don't we take a shot at learning how to teach Super Snipers? You can blame Galen's Games for agreeing to sponsor this one. Thanks, Galen. It's Galen's game, like possessive. Like Galen designed and published it, and the company's also called We're moving on. Did you know? There's a teacher's guide for every game on the show. It sums up the video for you so you don't have to skip around in the video timeline, which is like the worst part of every video tutorial. I'll even remind you about it at the end of the video. I'm so good at this. Now let's learn how to get someone excited to do some rootin' tootin' cyborg shooting. Super Snipers is a dueling game with tons of content in the box. You've got 2 variations of the 2-player mode, 1 turn-based, 1 real-time, and 2 solo modes with the same options. There's also a drafting mode, a blitz mode, and if you've got 2 copies of the game lying around, a 4-player mode. On top of all that, it's got variable setup with 12 locations split between the 2 players that you can use to adjust the difficulty. It's even got 7 gorgeously illustrated asymmetric characters in there, plus a couple more with promos and expansions, each with unique abilities that play completely different from each other. For a game of its caliber, it packs quite a punch. For your gamer friends, this one is such an easy sell. A sniper v sniper duel with tile placement, optional real-time elements, and super cool character abilities. It's kind of got everything the vast majority of board gamers look for in a game, and most of the parts that your typical hobbyist might not like, such as the asymmetry or the real-time elements, those can be taken out. No matter what their preference is, you can probably give them a good reason to at least give this one a shot. For your other friends and family, the sci-fi dystopian future makes for such a cool setting. Like I mentioned earlier, the art in this game is amazing, especially on each one of the characters. Each one has such a cool vibe to them, like you're guaranteed to find one that speaks to you. The one that speaks to me is Gunhead. He's got a gun for a head. If the theme, setting, art, or characters of the game isn't enough to sell them alone, the components are a solid option to turn to. You've been seeing the acrylic upgrade pieces, which are nice and clicky-clacky, and even if you don't pull the trigger for those, the double-punched boards make it oh so satisfying to set up. The pieces slide right in. That's so, oh, yes. Yes, that's amazing. One more. Fantastic. The other thing that's cool with this game is its story, and I will be doing a dramatic reading of it in the bonus content video linked below and up in the little thingy thing up there. Finally, the silver bullet of any modern board game pitch is its playtime. If you wanted to, you could get through a partial learning game in like 10 minutes, with a full game taking less than 20 to 30 minutes, making it crazy convenient as a filler game while you wait for your friends to finish Arc Nova for the 7th time. They always start it right before you get there. I think they're doing it on purpose. With Super Snipers, you can have a great time and get in and out faster than a speeding bullet. Here's a 30-second pitch you can load into the chamber to convince anyone on giving Super Snipers a shot. Imagine looking down the scope of a sniper rifle. The weight of what remains of this dystopian world is on your shoulders as you scan the enemy turf, looking for the other sniper hunting you down at the same time. In Super Snipers, you play as genetically enhanced cyborgs called, wait for it, Super Snipers, in a tense 1v1 duel. You'll be searching each location your opponent might be hiding in, and then once you find where they are, it's up to you to quickly draw your scope, isolate innocent civilians from your target, and take the shot. However, each shot you take compromises where you are firing from, limiting the places you have to use as a vantage point. Outmaneuver your opponent, locate and isolate them quickly, and use every tool you have at your advantage, because it's up to you to save the last of humanity from themselves. So, like I mentioned a few times earlier, Super Snipers is a game of many modes and setups, but for your first game, you'll be playing the duel mode like it suggests in the rulebook. This will be the non-real-time version of the game. The rulebook doesn't directly call it out, but the setup shown in the rulebook is what you'd use for your first game, but as always, I'm gonna holster some of those components in the box for later, namely everything that doesn't get brought out until one or both of you gets shot. 4 characters, each one of them has a super cool and unique ability that really set them apart from each other. It's one of the best parts of this game. So naturally, we're gonna chuck it in the bin. Yeah, I love the character abilities, don't get me wrong. The problem with them on your first game is that they heavily rely on keywords to work. If I handed you your character at the start of the game and you read, once per your target phase, you may use your concentrate bonus to place a time focus over an innocent. This isolates them. Be honest, you would just read, blah, 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 blah. I didn't use the character abilities for the first game for anyone I was teaching how to play, and we both had tons of fun. And introducing these character abilities in their second game made them much more interesting. For their first game, they can pick a character token based on vibes, but other than that, we can leave the character cards in the box for their first game, at least in my opinion. Super Snipers is a two-player game, but something I've done to great effect with other two-player games is to have two other people be the ones playing against each other, preferably both not having played the game before. I talk about doing this sort of thing a little bit in my Party Master episode of my vodcast that you can check out in the normal places people link to YouTube videos, but basically, you can play as more of a dungeon master, narrating the experience, adding excitement to the game by giving the game flavor. Basically, it's like you're a board game MC. It also doesn't change your teach at all to do this, so give it a shot the next time you're alone with two friends and you really want to practice teaching board games, which is a completely normal skill to actively practice. Finally, if you're playing against someone who's learning the game and it's not your first rodeo with Super Snipers, it's like your third or fourth rodeo, you can choose to give yourself a handicap by swapping out the locations your opponent can hide in with the 4, 5, and 6 locations to make it much harder to shoot them. I recommend giving the choice to the other player if they would like you to play with a handicap or not. By doing this, it makes it so that it doesn't feel entirely like a hollow victory if they wind up winning, since they have the agency to pick their difficulty, so to speak. And it also makes losing sting a little less if they chose to play on a level playing field, since they were the one to decide that you shouldn't shoot yourself in the foot. Oh, and the reference sheets. I don't even know where they are. These things are great if you know how to play the game. They're absolutely terrible if you don't. Keep one, there it is. Keep one out for yourself and leave the second one in the box. Now that we're locked and loaded, let's pull the trigger on this teach. As always, once you've gotten things out of the box, I suggest starting by setting the big 3 to get your teach firing on all cylinders. These big 3 are setting the stage, setting the goal, and setting the expectation. Wait, firing on all cylinders is for cars. Close enough. To set the stage, you're going to explain the setting. Earth sucks, it's 2484, genetically and cybernetically enhanced super soldiers. You know, the usual. The introductory story is also really great, and I highly recommend giving it a read to get a feel for the vibe of this game. Set up some music. The Cyberpunk 2077 soundtrack is a great fit for this one with its mix of tense and exciting music to help score your sniping. As with setting the goal in other games, we're going to touch on how to win, but focus on the immediate goal for everyone at the table. Technically speaking, there are 3 phases in each round, but the first phase is more like a setup than anything. More on that in a second, but for now, you'll say that each one of you will be hiding in one of these 3 locations. And once you find out where your opponent is hiding, you'll get to zoom in with your scope to take the shot. Depending on the audience, you can just play 1 to 3 rounds, either resetting after someone gets shot or until someone gets their second shot. That way you can get to a new game earlier and add in all the things we took out for the learning game that really don't make a ton of sense until your second time through. Last but not least, we've got setting the expectations. This is a very puzzly, thinky kind of game that makes it really easy to back yourself into a lot of corners and awkward situations. Just know that there are lots of tools you have at your disposal to help you out if you ever find yourself in a bind. It's also prudent to mention that there is a smidge of luck to be had in Super Snipers, so if you're playing with someone really sensitive to bad RNG, they'll appreciate a small heads up. However, the designer threw in tons of catch-up and balancing mechanics that are incredibly slick, so they don't really have too much to worry about. For the first phase, you've got 3 places to pick from in which to hide from the enemy sniper, which, when you know the game, is a super interesting decision. The higher the number at the location, the better defense it has. However, if you win the round, you lose access to that location, meaning it'll be easier to shoot you later. It's one of the most tactile and responsive risk and reward and bluffing systems I've ever seen in a game. However, the things that make it interesting are also the things that make it a little confusing to new players. Personally, when I'm not reading off a script, I can never seem to word what I literally just said about the locations right, so I've included a little blurb to read out on the teacher's guide just in case you've got a competitive friend who you think is up for the added complexity. If you'd rather skip that part of the teach, just have you and your opponent just shuffle your hiding discs and place them randomly to keep things moving for the first game, especially if you only plan on playing a 1-round game. If this video is your first introduction to Super Snipers, it might look a little weird to put your tokens on the opponent side of the field. Something that I struggled with when learning and teaching this game is figuring out what each of these boards represents, and I don't really know why. It's not that confusing. In front of you is what you can see from wherever it is that you're hiding, not the location that you're actually firing from. The visual analogy that helped me wrap my head around it the best is that the tiles in front of you are like looking through a window, and that's where your opponent is hiding, and vice versa for your opponent. This game has simultaneous turns turns, which while I find super speedy, I occasionally found myself messing up. It was really easy to accidentally move on or forget to move on to your next turn and imbalance the game significantly. This is especially true when you're focused on teaching it to a new player. The game comes with 2 little Brazilian steakhouse style tokens that you can use to indicate whether or not you're ready to move on to y'all's next turn. I found that both of you having one of these is a little redundant, especially since there are only 2 of you, so I just used one, and if you or they are taking a bit of time on your turn, that's when you flip over the waiting token. The simultaneous turns make the game lightning fast to get through. However, I could see someone finding them a little overwhelming. To combat this, you can instead give a player marker to one of the players and have them be the starting player and just ensure everyone gets the same number of turns, treating each pair of turns as happening simultaneously. It doesn't affect the game that much in a learning game situation. Also, playing with normal turns is not only beneficial to your opponent if they need more help during their turn, but also for you if you're finding it a bit tough to teach the game and take your own turns at the same time. Second phase, this is where the game takes off. This is the point where you'll explain what focus is, which are the Tetris pieces, while pointing out the 3 different colors and the names for those. Have them draw out 3 focus from their bag and put them in their line of sight, or basically the next pieces you'll be drawing from during your upcoming turns. Also worth noting, the first piece in your line of sight, the one that you'll basically always use on your turn, is called your active focus, and other aspects of the game will refer specifically to this piece, so it's worth bringing up that name verbatim. Also, I found while playing, it's super easy to accidentally grab the wrong piece from this line of 3, so what I found is that whenever I go to refresh the line, you just take your active focus and you put it on this spot here, so that you remember that the focus you should be using is this one. Now that focus is set up and explained, this is where you'll explain what you're going to be doing every turn. On your turn, you're going to take your active focus and you put it on one of your boards, then you're going to shift your line of sight over once and then draw a new tile for the end of that line. In the finding phase, they'll be placing their focus on the 3 locations in front of them, representing what they can see from where they're hiding. Once they find you, they get to zoom in and take the shot represented by the bigger matching boards that we've set off to the side. It's time to go through the placement rules for focus. Fortunately, on one side of the reference sheet is a handy dandy list of all the rules for placement, so you can just go down those one at a time if you need a reference. For those watching who haven't read the rulebook before watching this video, like you're supposed to, here's the quick version. Your first focus of each color has to touch the edge. Future pieces of that color have to touch a previous one orthogonally, and this is called a chain. You can only have one chain of each color on any particular board at a time. And lastly, every single one of those rules I said can and will be broken at some point in the future. Once you get focus placement out of the way, you'll use the targets in the middle of each of these boards to talk about isolating, which just means that you have an enclosed space that doesn't share any orthogonal edges with the edge of the board. While you're talking, you can use your pieces to demonstrate these rules on your opponent's boards. As you continue playing, just make sure that they're not breaking any of these rules as they put their pieces out. And finally, you'll talk about surveillance, which are these little shindigs. Cover one with one of its colors and you gain an extra piece at the start of the next phase. Once you find them, it's time to make sure you actually shoot the right person. At the start of this phase, you'll need to set up the scope of whoever found their target. If you were the one to achieve that goal first, go ahead and set yours up and just say you'll explain this part of the game when they find you, because when teaching games, I find it best to try to put whatever information they're learning as close to when they actually get to use it as possible. Otherwise, you'll dive into talking about all the information that gets added on with this phase. Fortunately for you, this phase plays exactly the same as the previous. Take a focus, put it on the thing. Stuff like isolating, focus chains, covering stuff up to get bonuses, that's all the exact same, it's just on a bigger board with more stuff. Once you get the stuff that's the same out of the way, you'll need to run through the new stuff as you have them put out their surveillance focus. The way that I've been handling how to explain how the 3 bonuses work is just by saying bonuses are like surveillance spaces from the previous round, and just like with those, you'll want to cover them up with matching colors to unlock their bonus for the round, which are all very useful. That's usually all I say, and then let them go on to put all their surveillance pieces on their scope. Once they actually cover up one of those bonuses, that's when they'll flip the corresponding token over and you can explain what they do. Explaining each bonus as you get to them will naturally spread out this part of the teach and keeps it from feeling like an info dump. Another thing you'll need to cover as they get to this phase are the special isolation rules. The yellow meeples have done nothing wrong and are, like all of us, trying not to get shot in the face. Innocents have to be isolated from the red meeples so they don't get in the way, as well as the edge of the border, like the targets you are isolating in the second phase. Something to mention earlier rather than later is how you can very easily not leave yourself enough space to isolate one of these guys. Remember, all the pieces are tetrominoes or Tetris pieces, so you'll basically always need a gap of 4 spaces or more anywhere you want a piece to go. I'll mention it here that in the times that I taught it, this was the one thing new players seem to mess up the most. Like I said earlier, there are ways to fix it if that happens, but definitely be watching like a hawk as soon as they put their surveillance pieces out for any avoidable situations. Then you'll walk them through the isolation rules for the target, which is by far the most important part because this is how you actually win the round. I love this part because this is where you actually get to talk about the bullet that they've had in the chamber this whole game. So, isolating the target has all the same rules as before, however, there are 3 things that make isolating a target special. First, all the innocents will need to be isolated before you can take the shot and end the round. Second, when you isolate the target, all the spaces visible as part of that isolation need to be entirely within these crosshairs, called the kill box. And third, you have to leave enough room for your bullet to cover the target. I recommend telling them to hold on to the bullet and holding it over the target, just to make sure that they're not forgetting to leave enough room. Also, the area that's part of the target's isolation doesn't have to be the exact size and shape of the bullet either, you just need to be able to fit it in there, so a few extra spaces on the side are fine, as long as they're all in the kill box. As you approach the ending of the first round, you're likely to run into the issue where new players, especially those with a little bit less foresight, are going to quickly back themselves into a corner and leave no room for their bullet in the middle, like I mentioned earlier. I've tried to warn players that they need to keep an eye out for this, but it's just really easy to do an accident. Heck, I did it last time I played prior to writing this episode, and I had played a half dozen games by that point. When you find yourself stuck, there are these 2 little gizmos up at the top of your scope that you can use to help you out. You can flip each one of these once per round to just straight up remove a piece from any of your boards, including during the previous round. I will only point these out as someone needs them because otherwise it's just some extra rules fluff they won't use. Clear tokens can also be used to discard your active focus, so they have more utility than just clearing out pieces from the board. However, I'd only explain this if you or your opponent's next piece sucks real bad. The clear tokens combined with all the bonuses have been enough to help everyone I've played with fix basically every mistake they've had. However, I could easily see someone running into even more problems than they have solutions. I would just say let them remove extra pieces if they need to, if it were to come to that. However, the pacing on this game is pretty tight, so it's unlikely they'll hit that point before you can put them out of their misery. Basically, what I'm saying is I wouldn't slow play for their sake. You'll want to be a little aggressive in this game, even as the teacher. At this point, one of you got shot with a very spicy bullet, but super snipers are just like cats with 6 fewer lives. As the round concludes, you'll walk through the normal cleanup steps explaining the benefits both sides get at the end of a round as you wrap it up, which includes the tactical advantage and adrenaline bonuses. Even if you're resetting the game to start again after the first round, I would still at least briefly explain those mechanics. For your first game, I did tell you to skip the character section, but if they got shot first, you may want to introduce their character's adrenaline bonus into the game as a way to help them out if you're going to keep playing on after a practice round. Once you finish up your first full proper game of Super Snipers, you can pat yourself on the back, which probably has a few new holes in it by now. Since Super Snipers plays pretty quick, you'll probably be moving on to a second game real fast, which at that point you're more than welcome to let them pick out a new character based on their abilities. None of the characters are particularly easier or harder to explain than any of the other ones in my opinion, especially now that they know how to play the whole game. However, at the recommendation of the designer, my boy Gunhead is the best choice for new players. This game does have a phenomenal real-time mode as well, but I would recommend one more practice game using all the characters and mechanics before throwing sand timers into the mix. And with all that, you've successfully taught Super Snipers. It's a really fun 2-player game with way more of an intense vibe than a lot of the other duel-style games that are popular at the moment, and that's not to mention the pretty solid solo mode and optional 2-copy 4-player mode you can do too. It's the teacher's guide. It's got the whole video summed up for you, and you can just save it to your phone or print that sucker out, leave it in the box for the next time you teach Super Snipers. If you're the kind of person where teaching a game stresses you out, this is a great way to have someone watching over you like a guardian sniper angel. Again, a high caliber thank you from Galen's Games for providing the game and commissioning the episode. Because of them, you have access to the behind the scenes and outtakes video that's normally a Patreon supporter exclusive. So if you like my incredible personality, there is more of that available to everyone, and you have Galen to thank for that. For better or for worse. If you're a viewer and want to see a game on the show that I haven't covered yet, I have a direct commission link through my Patreon, and if you're the one making a game, reach out to me and we'll talk about getting an episode of the show made for your game. Otherwise, supporting me on Patreon is the best way to help decide what gets covered on the show, as my delightful patrons get to vote on what's covered in future episodes. With all that out of the way, I think that's it for me. Thank you for watching. Now go and play some Murder Tetris. I feel so masculine. I see why guys like guns now. I get it.